Hey guys, I'm Nick May from The Business Brush. Today we're going to be talking about the B word, budgeting. Stay tuned. Now I know a lot of people don't like talking about budgeting. They don't like talking about finances in the first place. We grow up and our families never talk about finances and how to spend money. And so this is an area that a lot of painting contractors really struggle with, is financials and budgeting. So today I want to talk about 3 things to consider when you do budgeting. So first thing is that you need to have good financials. Not good financials, you need to have great financials. So I'm going to implore you to make sure that your bookkeeping is fantastic. Now, it took me many years to understand that I was not the right person to do this job in my company. I always thought I can't afford to hire a bookkeeper. Well, I believe that it is imperative if you or somebody in your family, I know a lot of guys have their spouses doing the books. Now, I think that person should do it if they're good at it. But if they're not good at doing financials or understanding QuickBooks, then you need to hire this out. And that's what I ended up having to do. I hired an outsourced CFO. I pay him a monthly fee, and he not only does all the bookkeeping, but then we meet and talk about the financials as well. And so he's a resource for me as I look forward to the future and when I do some of my budgeting decisions. So there's no way that you can even have a conversation about budgeting if you don't know what your past experience has been, because that's really where it all starts. When I do budgeting, and I just kind of completed this exercise for 2020, is I look back at what did I do last year this same month. So I break out every single month on a tab, on a spreadsheet, and I actually don't do the budgeting in QuickBooks. I like using a spreadsheet. It just gives me a little bit more freedom. And so I take all of my numbers out of QuickBooks from the previous year, month by month, and you can export each month out in an Excel spreadsheet. So I build a whole series of worksheets in Excel that build on each other. So my first tab is actually the year end from the previous year. And then my next tab is January, then February, then March, all the way through to December. And then I have a totals tab at the end. Now, this takes many hours to go through for the whole entire year, and I go through it several times. So it's very important to understand your top line, which is your gross profit, and then your bottom or your net profit at the very end. So looking at history, looking at what you did last year helps you to understand when the cycles in your business happen. Because if you're anything like me, you have months that are better performing months on a consistent basis than other months. Now, the longer you're in business, the more history you have, and the more you'll understand it, and your budgeting will get stronger and stronger and more accurate. So that's my second point, history. History makes this better. So if this is your very first time starting to do a budget, don't beat yourself up. We need to start somewhere. And as you do it more and more, it'll get better and better. And the third thing that I want to encourage you to do is make sure you set up the budget and then you review it on a regular basis and you stick to it. So one of the things that I'm getting ready to do with my team is actually giving out budget numbers of where we can spend money. So if you have a smaller organization and you control all of those things, it's going to be easier for you. Now, I have people in the office that have spending capabilities. I have people out in the field that have spending capabilities. And so I need to make sure that they understand what the expectation and what the budget is. And you have to understand that you will have months that are higher and some months that are lower. So you have to take the year in perspective. One area that I know this happens quite often is in our automobile expense. So most months, it's a very consistent, it's typically just gas and maybe an oil change here or there. But every once in a while, we have to make an expenditure of buying new tires. And that can be $1,500. And so I don't ever typically know when that's going to happen. And so we have to budget for that. And so when I'm looking at the monthly numbers, I look at what the year was. What did we spend last year? What did we spend in 2019 completely on automotive? And so that'll help me understand the spikes in the months in the year, but we keep that in perspective so that if we're going to spend, let's just say $24,000, that's $2,000 a month. I know that we're not going to spend $2,000 a month every single month. And if you stick to that, you would be setting yourself up for failure, because on most months you're going to spend around $2,000 and then you're going to have that spike of $3,500 and you're going to go way over budget. So let's say if you know that you spent $24,000 last year, you're going to set a budget of $2,000, but you're also going to have that expectation that most months are probably only going to be about $1,500, so that you can absorb for the year the whole entire $24,000. Hopefully that makes sense. The other thing I look at very specifically when I'm doing my budgeting is my percentages on certain things that are very predictable. So labor costs for the month and labor costs for the year. I look at those. I look at my material costs, again, for the month and for the year. Those are typically going to be pretty consistent percentages. Depending on what kind of painting you do, we do a lot of cabinets, so I think our consistent material costs is about 8% of our gross total sales. For you guys that might be doing a lot of walls and a lot of commercial work, that number might jump up to 15% of your total gross. And so then the other couple numbers that I look at very consistently are my miscellaneous tools and supplies. That's going to include things like tape and caulk. I don't put those in the direct cost because I know on a historic average we're about 3% on our supplies. If that number jumps up, I know something is wrong. Then you're going to look at your gross profit margin. So again, that's going to be above the line. That's going to include everything that's a direct cost into those projects. And we historically are at about 45%. I know if that jumps out of whack, then something is wrong. If we go way below that, I also know that something is wrong. Something might be reported incorrectly in our spreadsheets. So that's our baseline. And then we have the rest of the money to pay for our overhead. Buildings and facilities, that's where our automotive expense is going to be. That's where our marketing dollars are going to be spent. Our admin overhead or payroll. So lots of line items to go over in depth, and really need to dial that in specifically. So if you have people you have had on the payroll for a long time and you think that they probably deserve a raise, it's much better to budget for that. And I always try to budget for worst case scenario on the year, because I want to come in under budget. I don't want to be maxing out that budget. I want to say, if all things go worst case scenario, I'm still going to make 12% or 15%. That's the last number that we're really going to look at from a percentage basis, is what does our final net profit come out to for the end of the year. One of the things that I always have to consider is twice a year I have a triple month payroll. That means payroll goes out 3 times versus the average of 2 times a month. And when that happens, all kind of my numbers are out of whack. We typically either get to a break-even point or sometimes go negative for that month. But if you budget accordingly, maybe on those months you're spending a little bit less on marketing, or you really thin down as much as you possibly can in the other areas to make sure that you're at least at break-even point. Just make sure you consider that, and I figure out which months those are going to be every year so that I can properly plan for it. It always drives me crazy when I talk to parents and it's like Christmas has surprised them every year. And I don't understand that, because Christmas comes the same day every single year. At the May House, we budget for it and we plan for it, and so we have money set aside. And that's what this is all about. You're just setting up money in systems so that we know that there aren't any surprises. Now, there can be surprises, but if you plan for those things in your budgeting, then we can make sure that we are hitting our profit margins and we're making the kind of money that we want to make in our business. Because that's really, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. That's why we do this, guys. We are in business to make a profit. Now, my suggestion is that you are at least at a 10% net profit. If you're under a 10% net profit, there's something majorly wrong. Now, unless you're a $50 million company, then those guys sometimes are consistently under 10%. But if you're a smaller business and if you don't have a lot of overhead, then your net profit at the end of the day is going to be a lot larger. The last thing I'll say about budgeting is it is your responsibility. It is your responsibility if you're not profitable. It is your responsibility if you're not tracking this properly. You can have people in place to help you, but at the end of the day, if you are not making money, you are the business owner, and this is your responsibility. And the budgeting aspect and the financials of your business is the most important activity that you are responsible for. So make sure that you are doing it and you are putting aside the right amount of time and energy every single month so that your financials are accurate and your spending is accurate and you are not overspending, because trust me, the bigger you get, the easier it is to let that money slip through your fingers. Hey, thanks for joining me today. Would you do me a favor? Would you make sure that you subscribed? And please give a thumbs up or comment below. And would you please share this on social media? Hey, I'm Nick May from The Business Brush. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.